Good afternoon, community. This is Dr. Anita back with you for another insanity check, along with my crew, Sharday Perry, Eloy Garcia, and Adrian Pastor. And we are talking this month about the fact that every voice and every vote matters. Yes, it is the month of October. Yes, election day is next month in November. And we just want to make sure we give you plenty of time to think about the fact that yes, your vote and yes, your voice matters. That being said, in our last show, we were talking about the process. In this show, we're going to make it a little more personal. But I have to tell you, when we got done with that last show, there was a huge sigh of relief and a little debrief going on. Shar, I think you kind of gave me one of these at the end. And so I want to know, what was that about? What were you thinking?
As much as I enjoy these conversations and they're so stimulating and I genuinely learn a lot, it's heavy because this is our reality that we're discussing. It's not a movie or a book. It's literally what's happening right now, right here. So it can be a bit overwhelming when we think about how much is really out of control and how much we still have to fight for.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have a couple of other podcasts. The first one is Real Conversations, and it's more of a monologue where I'm just sharing my thoughts. And then the other one is Real Conversations with Dr. Anita, where I talk with a subject matter expert. And in both of those, and this one in particular, it's all about keeping it real. It's about real conversation, about real issues with real people. And I often make it a point of saying that none of us are experts, but we are experts in our own lives and how life is showing up with us and for us and through us. And in that incident, these are real conversations. And yes, they get real heavy. So I appreciate you sharing that. Eloy, you had some thoughts after our last show. What were those?
I really appreciate being able to have these conversations with you all because you're such a wonderfully informed and intelligent group of people. And the analogy that Shar made in the last show about the fire, right? And the West Coast being on fire, but also there being certain ideological fires throughout our nation was really important. And also led to why do these uncontrolled burns happen in California? And it is because of the relationship with forestry and with making profit off of wood and not doing what you need to take care of yourself and ensure longevity. Because if the forest burns down, then no one gets to profit off of anything, right? So was it worth it? Was it worth making, controlled burns illegal? Was it worth letting it get to this point? And I really enjoyed that analogy that Shar made.
It was a strong analogy and it was quite appropriate. It really was. Now, Adrian, at the end of our last show, you were at a loss for words. Tell us, what was that about?
To me, it's similar to what Sharday had mentioned, just feeling that sense of, I don't really know how to put it. It's like this sense of almost feeling a little bit drained. Because it is when you're talking about these real things, but yeah, like we said, it is really necessary and it's very much so important, and it's just real and honest. And sometimes I feel like I want to say something to maybe like chime in, but I think for everybody watching, know that other people feel the same way that you feel, and I'm sure that listening to things like this, you're hoping to get other perspectives, and it's okay to sometimes feel as though you don't have anything to say at the moment, but your voice does matter and it is heard, and it definitely does have a place. But definitely sometimes you just feel as though there's nothing to be said.
I love how you just ended that. Sometimes there's nothing to be said. Sometimes, though, it's just enough to sit in a room with like-minded individuals. Not to say that we're on the same page, not to say that we agree about everything, but we're like-minded in the sense that we want to have a real conversation and explore and see what comes out on the other side. And so I want to publicly thank all of you for being part of this crew. You all bring something so special to the discussion. Shar, you're the person that I usually go to first to kind of bounce my ideas off of and kind of to validate that I'm not crazy. And then Eloy, I like to come to you because you always give me other things to think about. And Adrian, I usually like to end with you because you always give me something to think about in a different way. And so I love this crew. I love the way our conversations unfold. I believe Shar had said a friend of hers asked how much rehearsal time do you guys have? We don't rehearse, people. This is a real conversation, but we are thoughtful in our approach and what it is that we think about. Yes, we definitely have a topic, but other than that, it is what it is. And that being said, these shows are not meant to influence you in any way other than to help you think through what might seem crazy in the world today. And I want to give a shout out to my very dear friend, Steph Nagami. Steph, I want to dedicate this show to you. Steph and I have been friends since our college days, and she sent me a text and she said, you know, Saturday mornings, I used to get up and do my chores and kind of dread it. But now every Saturday, I listen to every single one of your shows. So, Steph, I want to thank you for being with us. And for our new listeners, the first Saturday of every month, it's Real Conversations with Dr. Anita. First Saturday of every month. I've got so many shows. First Saturday of every month, it's Keeping It Real. It's Keeping It Real with Dr. Anita. And that's my monologue. That's where I share my personal thoughts and tee up the conversation and the theme for the coming month. The second and third Saturday, I'm here with my wonderful crew, the nSanity Check crew, and we just kind of talk about what seems crazy to me. We talk through that first topic just in general terms, but in the second show, we talk from a more personal standpoint, and that's where we are today. And then the last show of every month is Real Conversations with Dr. Anita, where I actually bring in a subject matter expert. So 3 different ways for you to look at a same topic throughout the month. Thank you so much for joining us. Please go to the YouTube channel, drnita.com, like and subscribe and share with your friends. So now that we've gotten that out of the way, we're going to pick up where we left off in the last conversation. And the theme, as you can see going across the bottom for October, is still every voice and every vote matters. And the topic today is the election and people of color. And it seems to me people of color are no more popular and important and courted than during election season. And I want to know how my co-conspirators are feeling about that today. So who wants to jump in and start first? As a person of color, how are you feeling about this season's election?
I am stoked. There is Adrian, we're always on the same level here.
I know we're on the same wavelength, but you go first.
I'm stoked that there's someone in office someone who is running for office that is saying all the things that are on my list. And I don't mean in just like a general sense of, yeah, I'm going to change healthcare and believe in education, but they are structural plans that you can see. This is where we're going to start, and then this is where we're going to go, and then this is where we're going to end. And I'm excited to see that there is someone that could potentially be in office that looks like me. I feel like it's a whole different kind of hope, a whole different kind of dream. You know, we had the first African-American male president, and that was amazing. But to have an African-American female, this election means everything. So I'm excited. I'm hopeful. And at least we have a chance. At least we're on the ballot.
Eloy?
In previous elections, like you're saying, I feel like there's a lot of pandering that happens, right? And just so we can feel heard and represented in those moments and then go and vote for that person. However, in echoing what Shar is saying, this is different. This is different. You know, Biden and Harris really know and are directly in tune with this election and the importance of it, and are really informed in how to create changes to evolve our nation as we have been evolving over years. So I'm excited for the ticket. I'm excited for people to see themselves represented and also know that this isn't pandering. Don't be fooled. This is it. This is real. You know, this is real. And to be invigorated and to be motivated by that fact and just go full steam ahead.
Adrian?
I'm excited too. I'm excited that members of my own family are getting the chance now to share their voices. I think that's awesome and incredible. I'm excited for them personally. Coming from a Latina background, I think it's cool that more and more of us are getting the opportunity to vote. And I'm excited for the same reasons that you guys are excited as well. And I'm ultimately hopeful that this election, bring out more justice, that it can bring about more and more conversations like the ones we're getting to have today. And yeah, just hopeful for positivity, hopefully.
Yeah, positivity, I think, is key. And again, I'm going to stress that this is not about politics, although I'm sure people can kind of figure out that this panel is Democratic leaning, but that's not what this discussion is about. This discussion is about the process and how you feel like you are situated in the discussion around the process moving forward. I myself, my concern is I don't want this necessarily to be an election about I'm voting for the guy who's not in office. And as people of color, how are we processing that? I hear what you said, Shar, about the fact that it was so exciting to have Barack Obama as our first African American president. Thrilled to pieces about that. But I wonder how many people voted for President Obama for that reason versus necessarily what his policies were. Where do you think we are in terms of a people, in terms of culture, that we're voting because that's someone who's not currently in office versus we're voting for other legitimate reasons specific to policy?
That's a really good question. I think an interesting intersection that comes up also are people who voted for the incumbent the first time and now have changed their mind and are thinking of voting, in a different way. And I think that for them, that's where what you're saying, the root of what you're saying is if they may not be completely for Biden or Harris, but they maybe regret the decision they made before or are better informed about the decision that they made before. So I think there is that subset of people who, regardless of if it would have been Biden or Harris or not, had already made their mind up that they weren't going to make that same decision again.
I appreciate the fact that you said make that same decision and not same mistake, because someone else might have said make that same mistake. So thank you very much, Eloy, for being respectful of everyone that's in the room. I appreciate that. So let's talk about the upcoming debate. I believe it's next Tuesday. Of course, by the time this airs, the debate will probably be over. But for the sake of discussion, how do you think that's going to go?
I'm nervous. I feel like things are already kind of going a little rogue in terms of freedom of speech. And so I'm hoping these debates are able to focus on the points and not all of the outside chatter, if that makes any sense. I'm hoping it's about expressing your ideas and what you're going to do to achieve them, as opposed to outshining the other. I don't want this to be about I'm trying to win the vote. Let's have a conversation about the things that are on the table. And if somebody wants to watch, let them watch.
I'm so glad you said that. It's not about I want to win, but let's have a discussion about what's on the table. That being said, how should people of color be listening?
If I can chime in, my brain is thinking, I want to hear policies. I want to hear action. I want to hear specific things that are actually tangible. It's so easy for right now for candidates to pander and to say things that people want to hear, but I want to hear that talk about policy. I want to hear that talk about action and the way that we are going to change, because we're already changing in some ways. Let's just keep it moving. Let's not keep it where it's at.
And what would that look like for you, Adrian? What do you mean? Give us an example. Keep it moving in terms of?
In terms of, my mind immediately goes to the police. That's something that's on my mind, and we've talked about it in the past about sort of an exchange of power, of funding, of what would look for us as an American society. I think a lot about that, and about that, the power is in place there, that has been in place for so long, is being abused in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm. Say some more about abuse of power, Eloy. What do you see? What do you think?
Yeah, and in echoing what Adrian is saying, I think that those of us who want to defund or restructure law enforcement as it is now, I'll speak for myself, it's to support law enforcement in ways so that they won't be over encumbered. I think that when you are over encumbered, you become stressed, your patience level is stretched, your energy is stretched, your decision making is limited. And it's not about not being respectful and honoring what law enforcement does. On the contrary, it's allowing them to be able to focus on the real important issues. And that way the community as a whole can be also representative of teamwork. Because when we have a lot of influence and then we get a lot of funds, I think that is a combination for corruption and for abuse of power, because we, as a nation, I think we have an interesting relationship with the checks and balances as it pertains to law enforcement. I don't think we've been doing it as good as we could. And I think that directly feeds into that abuse of power.
I love how you mentioned the fact that we want to make sure that law enforcement does not feel overly encumbered, I believe is the word that you used. And I think that that's an important consideration to address and explore further. Yes, we seem to always see the injustices that law enforcement puts upon Black people in particular. But to your point, when anyone is overstressed, overworked, overtired, they don't think clearly. And how much of what we're asking law enforcement to do really isn't in their bailiwick. For instance, we talk about domestic violence calls. And my understanding is even police officers dread those calls because they can go any which way. So some suggestions have been made that send a social worker out there to perhaps be on site when those calls are made. But how safe is that for a social worker? So there are so many other things to take into consideration, especially when we talk about law enforcement and a law and order president. Shar, what are you thinking about these last couple of minutes of discussion?
To be frank, I was thinking about your original question of how people of color should show up to the debates. While I agree with what Eloy and Adrian are saying in terms of power and power being kind of corrupt, and I just feel like we need to be more informed, and not the kind of informed where we read an article or we hear a conversation or a podcast, but the kind of informed where you show up for class and you're going to go over this chapter and you're supposed to read this chapter and you're supposed to highlight the bolded words and write down the definition so that when the professor is talking about something, you already know what they're talking about. And it's almost like you're checking to make right, or what they're saying is the same thing. And I feel like no matter what direction we point this, whether we're looking at the debates, whether we're looking at police reform, it's like you have to know what you're talking about, and you have to know where the beginning and the end is and everything in between, because without that knowledge, you really don't have any power, because you don't even see where the loopholes are. You don't even see what's missing or what's wrong or how money and power is being distorted. So just team knowledge.
Beautiful segue. I love the way you brought it back to the question and the discussion, and how do people of color need to show up? And it goes back to something that I'd said in the Keeping It Real podcast, where I talked about knowing your own voice and valuing your own voice and being sure of your own voice, because your voice is going to show up in your vote. And it's more than just a ballot. And so when we think about the president saying, well, let's toss out the ballots, that way we don't have to worry about a transference of power. How do we, as people of color, truly understand the value of our voice in our vote and through our ballots? What suggestions do you all have?
Good question. Good question. I think those of us who are informed to a certain level, to a certain extent, need to do the work with our intimate relationships and our immediate families and our friends and our relatives, to make sure that they also know. Because like Shar is saying, team knowledge. I think part of team knowledge is sharing that knowledge, that actuality, the reality of knowledge, and reminding people, like you have been reminding us, Dr. A, that your voice matters. And like to what Adrian was saying, you may feel like it doesn't matter. You may be getting the message that you don't matter, but reinforcing the truth that that's a lie. That's a lie. If your voice didn't matter, they wouldn't try so hard to convince you of that.
Bingo. Well said. Absolutely.
Preach.
So then back to Shar's point. Adrian, did I just cut somebody off? Okay.
No.
So back to Shar's point about showing up for class. We're not talking about bringing your Cliff Notes. We're talking about having read the chapter and highlighting and going back to a thesaurus and looking at different ways that words can be used and looking at synonyms and antonyms and all these other wonderful ways that language can be used against those who are not self-educated. Where are some resources? How are some ways that we can become educated enough to make an informed decision when we go to the ballot box?
I don't know if I'm speaking for my generation or the generation before, but Google is my teacher. I go to Google for everything, and there are so many different point of views and opinions and websites that you can literally get both sides of the story. And I stick with my .org because I know that is legit and correct information. But I think it's equally as important to know the flip side, what people are saying against what you believe too, because that strengthens your argument. So
not only does it strengthen your argument, but it's important from the perspective of understanding where someone else is coming from. Later in the month, when I speak with Ms. Vicki Brox Allen, who is a conflict resolution subject matter expert, we're actually going to be talking about how to have these political discussions with your family around the Thanksgiving table, because this process is going to play out for a little while. And we need to be reminded how to disagree without being disagreeable. And so to your point, Shar, we need to understand the message from the other side, not even necessarily so that we can refute it, but so that we can really understand it. Because sometimes people get so wrapped up in language and emotion that they miss the essence of the message. So when you talk about going to Google and finding information, and I'm the same, even with Google, though, we have to be careful because some information is not vetted. Sometimes it's just thrown up there. So what resources can the three of you suggest that you feel are tried and true and objective, where we can go and get ourselves educated, not necessarily influenced, because sometimes we're conditioned to look for what it is that other people think we should look for. Where can we go to get educated with some objective, transparent information?
In my own personal
That's a good question. Oh, please
go ahead. Or two.
Adrian?
I look to specific people in my life that I feel are more politically wise than I am. That's personally what I do, because I'm not 100% on different outlets and places that are not, partisan one way or another. I'm not sure about that, but there are people in my life, people I look up to, mentors of mine that, have a greater political knowledge and sense of what's going on that I talk to. And so I encourage other people to look for those people in your own personal life. Maybe people don't have access to media in the ways that others do, and I know that's totally okay. I think it's important to remember that it's completely safe and fine to have those conversations, and for those people in your life that you feel like you can have those well-informed conversations with, even if you yourself don't feel like you have a lot of knowledge. Ask questions and make sure that you are being in touch and asking what it is that you're confused about, or policies or different things that you're not necessarily familiar with. Familiarize yourself by surrounding yourself with these people. That's what I think.
Excellent point. Mentoring throughout life is so important. And you don't have to just go to one person. You can go to several different people for mentorship and for coaching and counseling. But most importantly, the people that you trust, and not people that are necessarily going to sway you, but people that are going to present you with different thoughts and allow you and encourage you and even help you come to your own decisions and conclusions. Eloy, how about you?
Yeah, as it pertains to policy, I really encourage people to just dive into what it is. and look it up and read it. Take the time to read it, because some of them are long, they are involved. Like Shar is saying, have that highlighter with you, have that dictionary with you, and learn what these words mean, because I really don't think, I think that's the best way to learn the policy, right? To really actually see what it is. As it pertains to news, domestically, I really enjoy NPR. Some people would say that it's not objective. I think it is quite objective. And not domestically, I will listen to the BBC. I will listen to Al Jazeera News, because they are different outlets that are viewing our situation as a nation from the outside in. So I also am interested in the analysis of people that aren't so close to the issues like we are, because like you were saying in earlier, is we get caught up in language and emotion, and it's like, okay, let me take myself out of it and listen to some actual objective point of view, so that I can mull it over more. And I think all of that combined helps to really process it in ways that are better informed than me just, you know, going into it with all of my passion.
Love that. Love that. And thank you for the recommendation of NPR. I like PBS as well. Shar, what are your thoughts? What can you share with the audience before we go?
Just kind of piggybacking on what both Eloy and Adrian said, you know, using the people that are in your life, that are older than you, that are younger than you, that have access to different types of information, to have those shared conversations, and then taking advantage of some of the more prominent platforms that you trust and that others trust and that have been known to give resourceful information.
Another great conversation. Now, before we sign off for the day, I want to go around the room and ask everybody, how are you feeling about this conversation? Because after we taped the first show, you guys gave me some great stuff, and I wish we had still been taping. So I want to know, how are you feeling after this conversation right now?
I feel a little more lighthearted after this conversation. I think you asking the question of what this election means to me just kind of reminded me that there is still hope, and that this isn't over, and that we can still rally together to make a difference and to evoke change. And there's still more to learn. And I'm hopeful. You know, we can't go into this dreading the outcome, because we really have no idea what's going to happen. And so it's just kind of like, you know, keep your head up and keep your eye on the prize.
Yeah, thank you for that. Eloy?
I feel encouraged. I feel encouraged because there are a lot of us, so many of us, that are really looking at our situation in a nuanced way, and really attempting to educate ourselves and our family, and making these connections and having these conversations. So I feel encouraged. I feel encouraged. It's definitely not just the four of us.
Right.
So that makes me feel happy, and I'll agree, hopeful as well.
Great. So we've got hopeful, encouraged. Adrian, what's your word?
I feel the same way, and I can agree that you know, our previous conversation, as you listen to it, you can hear that there's hope in our voices, but there's also, like we said, that sense of concern and that sense of almost fear. Just because when you do talk about things that are so heavy and honestly just really frank to the situation we're living in, it can be discouraging. But I hope that this episode following is a reminder that though there are efforts to silence your voice, no matter what community you come from or background that you come from, that it does matter. And even if you feel like you can't have those conversations, maybe with your family, there are other people in your life that you can talk to that are able to listen. You know, people like us that understand exactly what you're going through, and we can identify with that. And so there's definitely hope. And like like you guys had said previously, the outcome is not here yet. So there's really no way for us to know exactly, you know, right, what's going to happen. We're just assuming the worst case scenario. And I think that's an important and necessary thing for us to do. But at the end of the day, I think hope is the most important thing to have. Regardless of what's going on, it's important to be hopeful, because this is our country and these are issues that affect each and every one of us.
And I would say my word would be resilient. this nation is clearly resilient. When you think about everything that we've been through since the first of this year, and right now I'm not necessarily talking about politics, I'm talking about everything that we've been through. COVID, the economy, the job loss, the uncertainty, mask wearing, people working from home, people Zooming for their lives, and of course the politics. I mean, there is so much that we have been through, and the year's not even over yet. And the word that just kind of pops into my mind is resilient, because regardless of the outcome of the election, it's still going to take resiliency to get through the next 4 years, regardless of who our leader is. If we have the current president for another 4 years, that will be his last 4 years. And so we can breathe, those of us who are uncomfortable with his leadership. If we have a new president coming in, we'll be able to breathe, because it'll be a different type of leadership. But let's not get wrapped up in assuming that just because we may have a transference of power, that things are going to get better quicker. That's not necessarily the case. Sometimes, as we know, things get a little worse before they get better. And that's just part of the process. And we need to trust the process. I personally put my trust in God, but after that, we need to trust the process. And that's something that I tell leaders when I'm coaching with them. It's something that I make sure I announce in a workshop when I'm dealing with teams, to trust the process. You may not always understand what's going on, but in the end, things work out. So that being said, again, I want to thank my crew for another wonderful and insightful discussion. Every time I think, wow, it just couldn't get any better, it gets better. And so I want to thank you for your vulnerability, for your transparency, for your authenticity. I want to remind our viewers, please tune in for October 24th. I believe that's the last Saturday of the month, where I will have the pleasure of hosting a real conversation with Dr. Anita. And my guest will be Ms. Vicki Brox Allen. She is a conflict resolution subject matter expert. And again, she's going to be helping us figure out how we can have these discussions around politics in which we may disagree, but we don't have to be disagreeable. She's got 3 tips for us. I cannot wait for that show. She's amazing. It's going to be another real conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. Remember, your voice and your vote do matter. So be thoughtful, get yourself prepared. Don't think about Cliff Notes. Go read the actual version of the book and show up for class, as Shar said. Prepare yourself. Listen to alternative forms of information, NPR. And to Adrian's point, find a mentor, someone that you trust, who's not necessarily going to try and sway you, but who's going to help you have conversations so that you can come to your own conclusions and make your own decisions. Thank you so much for joining us. This year's vote is consequential, and your vote and your voice does matter. Until next time, this is Dr. Anita reminding you to stay blessed and keep it real.